crowd tonight. Speaking of the voice of the resistance, our two moderators tonight have been leading the resistance since 2016. Jon Favreau and Tommy Vietor. Two of the brilliant creators of Crooked Media and Pod Save America stand at the forefront of Trump opposition. Jon Favreau was President Obama's speechwriter and was involved in almost every memorable speech that Obama gave. Tommy Vietor was Obama's deputy press secretary and national security spokesperson, as well as special assistant to the president. So, it's dark now, but I'm telling you this, security tonight is mighty. We thank the many officers of the California Highway Patrol here tonight. Hugo the dog is also here, and private security. So while we really do like the concept of free speech, forget about it. It's not happening tonight. No disruptions will be tolerated. Anyone who makes our guests or speakers feel unsafe will be removed. We understand that you want to take photos of Governor Newsom and our pod guys, John and Tommy. So when they appear on stage, you can stand up and take photos for 30 seconds. And when they come out, I hope you'll turn the lights on so that people can see them. Okay, we don't want to make all of these security guys jumpy, so stay in front of your seats and do not go into the aisles when you take pictures. Then sit down and put your phones away. There is no texting or filming during the event. I'd like to ask Stacy Brightman, my wonderful friend and CEO of the Ebell, to introduce the first partner of California. Thanks a million.
Good evening. My name is Stacy Brightman, and I have the honor of serving as the CEO here at the Ebell of LA and the Wilshire Ebell Theater. And on behalf of our board of directors, our incredible member volunteers and supporters, I am thrilled to welcome you tonight to this magnificent historic theater in the heart of Los Angeles. Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit about where you are. So the Ebell of Los Angeles is a nonprofit that was founded in 1894. We look good for 132. And we were founded during the fervor of the women's movement, when Los Angeles County only had less than 100,000 people altogether. And in 1894, a small but very bold group of women came together to carve out a public civic role for themselves. They could not vote, and most avenues of education or career were tightly shut against them. Yet, they believed that by creating their own opportunities to learn, to advocate, to lead, and to make art and shape ideas, they could and would build a stronger future for their daughters, their sisters, their mothers, and oh yes, their brothers, sons, and husbands too. Our mission remains the same as it was then, to inspire women and to build community. And just as with our founding mothers, art, literature, civic dialogue, and education remain the hammers of choice with which we shape a better Los Angeles. Now, this theater, in 1927, those resilient women built this remarkable arts and education campus as a beacon to the city, a place where creativity, culture, and civic engagement converge. Indeed, at nearly 100 years old, this theater is the oldest theater in the nation, built by women and still operated by women. From Judy Garland, who was discovered on this stage, to Nina Simone, from Dolores Huerta to Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and tonight we continue that tradition with a conversation with a very promising young man in a hurry. But before we begin, again, we too are really proud to acknowledge all the distinguished leaders with us this evening, and we're especially proud to welcome from the 2nd District, LA County, Supervisor Holly Mitchell. Thank you for joining us, Supervisor. Again, tonight's author, Governor Gavin Newsom, has spent his career navigating the urgency and complexity of public service, leading through moments of profound challenge and transformation for California and the nation. We're so grateful to him for sharing his remarkable story with us all tonight, and we're very grateful to all of you for being here and continuing this long, fabulous Los Angeles story and this tradition of gathering around art, ideas, and meaningful conversation. And now, it is my great honor to introduce Jennifer Siebel Newsom, first partner of California. Woo! An award-winning filmmaker, a fierce advocate for gender, equality, and child well-being. Please welcome Jennifer Siebel Newsom.
Good evening, Los Angeles. How are we doing tonight? It is so good to be back here with all of you, a city of dreamers and doers, the place where I was living when I met this man over here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen, and I've had a front row seat to this story for a very long time. Now, I've watched him wrestle with writing this book for years, and not as the governor or former mayor, but as a son sitting with complicated memories, as a brother replaying old conversations and wondering if he showed up the way he should have, as my husband thinking about the partner he wants to be, and as the father of our 4 children reflecting on the kind of man and father that he hopes to be for his children. There are many versions of Gavin in the world, and what you'll find in these pages is the one that I love and admire most. The curious, determined, humble, deeply empathetic policy wonk who reflects far more than people realize. And being here in Los Angeles feels especially meaningful to me. It was the city that gave me my start as a creative. And then when I met Gavin, I thought, whew, there is already enough drama in his world. I don't think I need it in my day job. Too many plot twists in one life. But in all seriousness, this city understands the power of narrative. Whose narratives are centered, whose are allowed complexity and grace, and whose are erased. As a filmmaker, my life's work has been mostly about that, speaking truth to power, rendering visible the invisible, and sitting with people long enough to really see and hear them. And that's why I love this book, and I'm so grateful that it seems like you all possibly do too. It's raw, it's deep, it's honest, it's not a typical political memoir, and it's a human account of the people and the places that made Gavin. Reading like a love letter to his ancestors and to those who formed him before the public ever did, especially his mother, Tessa. The grit people see in Gavin undoubtedly begun with her. And in many ways, that's why he wrote this book, for our children, not to define their story, but to give them his, so one day they can trace the threads themselves. Gavin, I've had the privilege of seeing you lead in public life, but I've had the greater privilege of knowing you. Your heart, your soul, your partnership. I'm so proud of you for sitting through this all and having the courage to put your whole self on the page. And for all of you, I promise, the man on these pages is even better in real life. So tonight, the story moves off the page and into conversation. He will be joined, as has been mentioned, by Jon Favreau and Tommy Vitor. Incredible, incredible talents who co-founded Crooked Media and launched Pod Save America, along with Pod Save the World. Their book, Democracy or Else, became a New York Times #1 bestseller. They built one of the most influential political media platforms in the country, creating space for smart, substantive conversations, and yes, making it entertaining. If you can believe democratic politics can be entertaining. John, Tommy, we are so glad that you're here with us. Please join me in welcoming John and Tommy, and in just a moment, my husband, Gavin Newsom.
Well, we certainly can't beat that intro for the governor, so we will just bring him out right now. The author of Young Man in a Hurry, your Governor Gavin Newsom.
Hala, cabrón, ya no te quedan balas, chambea. Hala, cabrón, ya no te quedan balas. Yo siempre picheo, enrolo otra vez. Yo siempre picheo, enrolo otra vez. Yo siempre picheo, enrolo otra vez. Yo siempre picheo. Dímelo, parcero. Siempre con la sed y no somos salseros. Ya sus solteros. Dijo que te vale beber aguacero.
Yes, I did.
Usando como tú, yo no lo
I don't have
tolero.
people.
Cabrón, tú eres chota, tú eres reportero.
All right, I'm almost, we're going to find out. I'm convinced I am.
What's so surprising about the book is it stops at your election as governor. It's all about your actual life before politics.
Yeah, you may want to leave right now. I mean, the whole idea was, you know, it's interesting, a little bit of the origin story. I was talking backstage. I had the privilege of working with Ann Godoff, a legend in publishing, and she was the editor of the book at Penguin Press. And she, interestingly and tragically, passed away last week on the day of the publication of this book. And anyone that knows Ann, she's fierce, she's tough. And about 7 years ago, she asked me if I was interested in writing a book. And it was marked, that book, by the relationship with Trump 1.0 and a little bit of the transition to the new administration under Biden. And it was a lot of storytelling about those first 4 years, chaotic years around social unrest issues related to COVID. And I submitted the book. And I'll never forget going on Zoom, and Ann just, there was something off. And I tried to stop her before we went into arguing the case and the merits for the book, which I was really proud of. And I said, if you want me, I know you may have some concerns. There's one chapter about my childhood and my family, and I totally get it if you want that out. And she goes, that's the only part I want in. So this was not the book I set out to write. It was the book that I had to write in response to that. And it's a book that I mentioned. It was a memoir, ultimately, of discovery, because it was a book that forced me to learn about my childhood, learn about my past. And that's why it ended with the passing of my father, to the question you asked. It went through Election Day, where he literally survived to see his son get elected governor of California. And so I thought that was an appropriate way to end the book. There's an epilogue that has some interesting stories that may fast track to the present a little bit. But it really is a love letter to my mom and dad and my family.
Yeah. That election night scene is really remarkable, given, you know, his story and trajectory and attempts to get into politics. And we're going to get into all of that and more stories from the book in a second. But there's a lot of big breaking news happening in the world. I think a lot of folks would like to get your opinion on it. President Trump took us to war in Iran on Saturday. It feels like a little scary out there right now. The attacks seem to be growing in the Middle East. There's not really a clear plan coming out of the White House. What's your sense of whether it was necessary to go to war now? And do you think Democrats should be taking steps to try to block Trump via a war powers vote or something in Congress?
Yeah, I'm a little old-fashioned. I believe in co-equal branches of government.
Yeah.
You know, we are celebrating. is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, after all. And, this historic project, the best of Roman Republic, Greek democracy, the notion of popular sovereignty, the rule of law, not the rule of Don, which we'll get into perhaps later. But I hope it's dawning on everybody he had no plan, no strategy. He had no interest or desire to engage you, me, all of us in understanding the why. Why now? What's the imminent threat? What are the intended and unintended consequences? The prospect of this becoming a regional war, was that thought through? Who was going to take over for the supreme leader, particularly after you went through 49 others? And now today, Trump says, well, maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe we get someone who's worse. But nothing was more damning, I think, of the moment and this administration and who Donald Trump is. It goes to the heart of who he is. Then his press conference yesterday, where his remarks, where he was lamenting the life, now it's 6, but 4 Americans that died. And he mentioned them in passing, and then went on to mention in great detail the drapes and the Imperial Palace on the East Wing that he's building, and went on to talk about the pile drive with real passion and conviction. It says everything about Donald Trump. The uncertainty in the world, the fact that we have allies under threat in UAE, we've got proxy war once again with Hezbollah in Lebanon, we've got all the anxiety as it relates to 20% of the world's oil flow and issues related to oil and prices and shocks and energy concerns and your 401k and the zig and the zag. And it begs so many questions. Why?
He's got a passion for design.
He's got a passion.
Loves renovation.
Hobbies.
Yeah. But and so yeah, you asked me about the War Powers Act. You asked me about invoking some consideration. I mean, it takes a cursory look at the Constitution to determine the requirement, declaration of war, for the president to get congressional approval. And so I appreciate Congress now getting back, not the leadership, but the minority getting back into the game in this respect. But this is a hell of a thing. And this is, remember, you guys all know this. He has done more airstrikes in his first year than the last administration did in 4 years. This is the 7th incursion, twice now, into Iran. At a time when he's cutting taxes for billionaires, he's cutting food stamps, he's cutting Medicaid, he's cutting Medicare. And here he is spending tens of billions of dollars, not for recovery here in Los Angeles. He has no interest in that, but overseas. This is a broken president. He's historic because he's historically unpopular, and we all have to recognize the moment we're living in and how perilous this moment truly is.
You mentioned the shifting explanations and rationales that are coming out of the White House. Yesterday, Marco Rubio pretty explicitly said that the timing of the operation was based on planning by Israel. He basically said, we knew that the Israelis were going to strike Iran, which meant Iran would strike back against our bases in the region, which means the U.S. had to preempt the response, I guess, and bomb the Iranians first. What did you make of that explanation? And then a lot of Democrats have looked at the Netanyahu regime and felt like, you know what, we don't like the trajectory he's on. It's time to rethink the U.S. relationship with Israel, especially military support.
Well,
where do you stand?
He's making that easy right now. Let's talk about that. So the first rationale was we've got to make sure that they're not armed a nuclear arm. But we, of course, that rationale I thought was resolved, meaning we had completely obliterated their sites. And so that was the first rationale. Then, okay, so well, maybe that wasn't the case, but now it's about their missiles. And they can perhaps hit the United States. And then you realize, wait, that's a decade plus away, if that. So that's BS. Okay, then it's about their militias. It's about their proxy. Then it's about their Navy. And then it's in response to the likelihood that Israel was going to, so we had to go in ourselves. And then you hear Hexet, God help us, his rationale or non-rationale. So this is Keystone Cops. But playing with real lives, with our reputation. They've already, so you see what's happened to our allies, you see what's happened in the NATO alliance in the context of truth and trust and the conversations that all of our allies are having now with India and with China as they're strengthening those relationships because they're starting to decouple or de-risk their relationship with the United States. But the issue of Bibi is interesting because he's got his own domestic issues. He's trying to stay out of jail. He's got an election coming up. He's potentially on the ropes. He's got folks, the hard line, that want to annex the West Bank. I mean, Freeman and others are talking about it appropriately, sort of an apartheid state. They couldn't even, I mean, we're talking about regime change. For 2 years, they haven't even been able to solve the Hamas question in Israel. So this is, I mean, you know, I want to be careful here, but you know, in so many ways, that influence in the context of the conversation of where Trump ultimately landed on this is pretty damn self-evident. And so Rubio may have been saying something else in the context of what he ultimately said in terms of being sort of pulled into some of these things. But I will say this, didn't surprise me in this context. I don't know if it was Napoleon or whoever said about a sword, the only thing you can't use a sword for is sitting on it. And when you bring 2 aircraft carriers out there and you assemble the kind of military force that Trump did over the last few weeks, it didn't surprise me ultimately they moved that direction.
Do you think, looking down the road, that the United States should consider maybe, you know, rethinking our military support for Israel?
It breaks my heart because the current leadership in Israel is walking us down that path, where I don't think you have a choice but that consideration. I mean, to say this is in America's interest at a time when affordability is at crisis levels, where you had an administration who literally got elected saying this is exactly the opposite of what they would ever consider doing. The fact that we are in this now regional war, all these proxies, the fact that we, you know, and all the grift and the corruption, that's also marks a huge part of this, and that's a real conversation we need to have, this board of peace. And the peace that the Witkoff family's getting, and the peace that Kushner is getting, and the peace that Trump Jr. is getting. You just got to reconsider the whole thing. You just have to. And, you know, that's a stubborn I didn't expect to be in that place.
Yeah.
You know, a few years ago, let alone, you know, where we are today. And it's accelerating in real time in a deeply, deeply alarming way. And you know, it's just one of many alarm bells that are ringing, and we can get it to democracy, our republic. We can get into what's happening with the, you know, secret police, you know, the bovino-ification of our, you know, of our streets, and what's happening in this country with democracy. You know, it's a precious and perilous time, but it also has parallels. And some of those are reflected in some of the storytelling in the book, and some of the revelations about my own family's relationship to, you know, the Red Scare, to Oppenheimer, to McCarthy and McCarthyism. And some of those currents, some of those tenets echo today in many respects.
One more newsy question. I'll connect it to the book. How about that? In the book, you talk about your first race for governor, and you talk about that one of the strategies you guys pursued was that you sort of directed your advertising campaign against a Republican candidate that was running, and said, because if, you know, the top 2 vote getters in California in the primary go on to the general, and if it was you and a Republican, in this case John Cox, who supported Trump, then you were to have a much easier general. And if it was Antonio Villaraigosa, it would have been a little trickier. So you elevated John Cox, and it worked.
And I know people hate that, but yes.
Well, it worked, you know. And now, even though you are, of course, irreplaceable, there is a race to replace you for governor.
Did you hear that?
Started there.
Irreplaceable. Here's the third terms, yes.
There is a very...
Don't worry.
Should we get the hats?
Though I do have a hat on my Patriots site. You can check it out. With our knee pads, and Newsom was always right hats, but I digress. You were asking me a question.
So, very crowded field of Democrats.
Yes.
A couple polls have actually shown that it's so crowded and they're splitting the vote so much that, you know, it has the 2 Republican candidates in the 1-2 spot, which would mean a Republican governor of California. Today, the chair of the California Democratic Party said, look, if you're not making meaningful progress towards winning the primary and you're a candidate by April 15th, you should drop out. I saw the Speaker of the Assembly agreed as well. Do you agree with that as well?
You know, Rusty Hicks, the head of the party, sent me his statement, and I read it a few hours ago, and I confess I agree. And I don't really process it because there's just, I mean, at this moment in history, with all the peril and promise that marks this moment, for California, the most un-Trump state in America, to have a Republican Trumper running, there is no margin for error.
Bad, yeah.
And so look, but I do confess, it is the hardest thing. I used to, when I was running for governor, and it was, all about me. And, I'm like, what is this Jerry Brown? Why doesn't he, and I was his lieutenant governor. I said, just go out of the state, governor. Go out. Why are you're still talking like you matter? Oh, now I feel his pain. And I'm like, I'm sorry, Jerry. It's hard when you're like, I'm a milk carton. I got a sell-by date. And it's, it's a countdown. By the way, my daughter is 16. She's like, oh, she can't wait till I'm no longer governor.
Circling the date?
Yeah, she's like, it's freedom. It's Liberation Day, the real Liberation Day for her. But it's, look, this thing's around the corner. I think it's been hard. Just a brief reflection. This race I don't think is getting the kind of attention it deserves. And it's hard at a time of Trump and Trumpism, where so much of our politics is so nationalized, and the ability to dominate the narrative and the shock and awe that is Trump is taken. And of course, last year, so much of it was marked by a lot of the work we did around the, Prop 50, et cetera. And so I appreciate that. You all did on that. So it's been a little more difficult. And you got an election in a few weeks, early voting. It's not even that many months. And so this is a moment for real self-reflection. Is it about you? Is it about me? Or is it about all of us? And the stakes couldn't be higher. And so all I'll say is choose wisely.
Let's talk about the book. You've been saying that writing this book made you realize that for most of your life, you were trying to be someone you're not.
Yeah.
Who are you trying to be?
I don't know. I think it's Oscar Wilde says, the first duty in life is to strike a pose. The second duty, no one knows. And I feel like I'm in that second phase. The first phase, I struck a pose. I put a mask on, and my face was growing into it in some respects. Quite literally, as a kid, I write about putting on a suit. I try to put on this armor. As a kid that struggled in school, it's a pretty severe learning disability that still marks who I am today. A lot of my anxieties, my insecurities. But I was also marked by those moments that I never fully understood until I wrote the book and learned about them in a way that I never understood. I'll give you a proof point of that. My mom was 19 when she was, pregnant with me. And a few years later, she was on her own with 2 kids. My father, for reasons neither of them explained, left just a few years after the birth of my sister, who's here tonight. And I didn't understand it until I learned about it at a oral history that he had done that none of us knew about at the Bancroft Library. And someone said, when I was asking about my father, and do you guys know why they got divorced? They never talked about it. They said, well, did you hear the interview he did in the Bancroft Library? So he said it to a stranger. He never told us. And he said that and there's reason that I'm telling this story. He lost an election for county supervisor, turned around the next year, ran for state senate, lost both races. And in the interview, he said he was broke and broken. And he had a breakdown and just had to get the hell out of there. And he left. And he went up to Lake Tahoe region. And for years and years and years, not only did I not understand that, I also never understood why my mom was so insistent that I never get into politics. And up until her dying days, she's like, you need to run, get out of this. And by the way, when that recall against me, qualified, she spoke very loud to me, even though she passed away in that moment. But it makes sense now. Here she was, coming from no wealth, no money, no privilege, got married to a guy who was 32 years old, scandal, at 19 looking for that mentorship, looking for that stability and support, and here he is, he takes off. Not because he was a bad guy, but he didn't know how to be a good husband, and he didn't know how to be a good father in those early years. And so here's my mom, just hard work, grit, single mom. And by the way, single moms. I mean, just mad respect for all those single moms out there. Honestly, like I didn't know. My mom died 20 years ago. I never told her, thank you. I didn't. That young man in a hurry with that mask on was just me. You know, I'm just running, just hustling, just trying to, you know, I'm grinding away. And here she was working 2-3 jobs. And by the way, when I say 2-3 jobs, I describe every single damn one of them. Part-time bookkeeper, working part-time in a department store, working for aid to adoption of special kids with intellectual and physical disabilities, working as a waitress at Ramona's restaurant, and just grinding, grit. We had roommates. We had people I would walk in, my mom's living in the living room because she left her bedroom because she's renting out. She's just trying to pay the damn rent. And so what this book is, I'm paying homage to her, to thank her for her sacrifice. And teaching me resilience, man. Teaching me grit. And in the process of doing this, also teaching me to let go. That it's okay. You know, take the mask off. Just be yourself. And so this book was cathartic. It's not a sanitized politician's book, man. It's not. I hope that.
It's not.
I hope it didn't read
I've
like
read
that.
plenty of those.
Yeah, those
I appreciate
those.
And I try to scrutinize, and I kicked the tires, and I went deeper, and I questioned my own relationship to, you know, my own participation and my own image of that slick guy and the whole thing. I mean, I get it. I'm not naive about that. And so this was my opportunity to, you know, tell a different story and also tell the story that my mom and dad deserved. That's right.
Oh, all right.
right.
We will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I appreciate it.
Let's get to the conversation. We can chat afterwards.
Well, I'd like to, and I appreciate what you're saying. Look forward to. Well, I look forward more talking about how we can sort of pull out of the stories and more of those opportunities. I appreciate it. I signed that law, but I appreciate it, and we are enforcing it. But look, I'm happy to talk about all those things, and let me try to pull in the present as we talk a little bit more about the past.
So, look, as you were saying, you clearly have a complicated relationship with your father. I can tell reading the book and in this conversation that you revere your mother and all that she did for you and all the sacrifice. But I was struck by a comment made to you, I believe by your Aunt Cindy, who said...
Who's, by the way, here tonight, so let's be careful.
She's a star in this book. No, fascinating person. I'd love to meet Cindy. But no, I think she said to you that your parents' inattention to your dyslexia as a boy was abuse.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a jarring thing to read, and I was wondering how it felt to you to hear that and whether you agreed.
I was, and some of you may know this, most of you probably don't or won't believe it, I can't read speeches. You'll never see me, someone hands me a speech and I start to read it. I could do a teleprompter, and it just takes dozens and dozens of hours for dozens of minutes. And it's hard just sort of focusing on that written word, but spatially I'm able to just, stare at the screen and I'm able to do it. And that's, my entire life I've felt dumb. In the back of the classroom, you're struggling through school. And by the way, it wasn't just me struggling. And this, again, part of the process of writing the book. I can't even imagine what it's like to be a mother, a single mom, trying to read your kids, trying to explain it's okay I mean, my mom said something that I'll never forget. I really was angry about it, and I wrote about it in the book. She said, in a fit of frustration with me, she said, it's okay to be average. And it's like, damn. I honestly, for years and years, I held a lot of resentment around that until, again, in the process of writing this over the last 5 years, I realized she just was saying, it's okay to just be you. You don't have to be someone you're not. You don't have to put that mask on. And so, my aunt saw it up close. She saw the struggle that my mom had. She saw me running out of classrooms, running away from, just constantly running and searching and struggling. And, I can't sugarcoat it. And anyone that's got a learning disability, I think you can appreciate this. But at the same time, you also start developing these superpowers because you start overcompensating for the things you can't do as well as everybody else. And that has been the gift, and the ability to, sort of absorb and create and look outside the lines and paint outside the lines, take risks. You have to take risks, learn from mistakes, have a resiliency. All of those things are also part of the journey of having a learning disability and having a learning difference. And so I'm here because of it, despite some of those early scars that mark those moments in the book.
I was going to ask, one thought I had when you were writing about dyslexia is, how does it affect you writing? Like, how did that was it a challenge writing the book?
Well, the worst part was doing the audio of the book. I mean, whoever did the editorial, they deserve a pay raise and hugs. You can't pay them enough, Penguin. That did it. It took 20, 30 hours to do the audio. Reading the book and reading about your own dyslexia as you're saying you can't read, going through 25 times that same sentence. So no, it's just an interesting, the writing process is difficult, but the opportunity to work with a writer, Mark Eriks, was how I was able to. That's why this was a 5-year process of writing this book. And constantly editing and iterating and stress testing. And we were joking backstage, writing about your family when most of your family's alive, that's not so easy. You better get it right, because you got to go to Thanksgiving dinner and explain, why the story is this, not what you're all saying the story was. Here's the real story. And so this was, it's an imprecise art, writing, particularly a memoir.
So you didn't grow up wealthy, but your family's close relationship with the Gettys put you in proximity, as you write about, to obscene wealth.
Yeah.
How did that shape your view of wealth, extreme wealth, as you got into politics and sort of how you look at the world right now?
Well, it certainly shapes the way I look at the world right now. I'm with the single moms in terms of, where the fundamental decision points are in that respect. But it was really interesting. My father grew up, one of his best friend, as my dad described, and his best friend describes, Gordon Getty. They grew up together in high school and became just best friends. And so much of their lives crossed paths. My dad, godfather of a number of the Getty kids, and their travails, their triumphs. My dad's godson was tragically kidnapped in a very famous kidnapping where his ear was cut off. And my father, marks so much of my early memories. In fact, a little cute story. Paul Jr. Was his name. He came back from the kidnapping. And his godfather, my dad, wanted to drive him and his 2 kids, we were visiting, down to Chestnut Street in the Marina District. And there's a story that I tell my sister and I in the back of the car, a relatively young age. And my dad just pleaded with us, whatever you do, don't talk about Paul's ear. Just whatever you do. And within a few minutes of Paul getting in the front seat, and we're driving along, my dad's driving, and I'm looking at my sister Hillary. I'm like, shh. And my sister just couldn't help herself. She's staring, and she goes, Paul, how many ears do you have? I'm like, oh God. And luckily, Paul had a great sense of humor. But it really marks my first memories of the family, and again, some of the tragedy, not just the triumph. And these are still to my days, some of my closest friends are members of that family. But I never was a member of the family. And And there's a scene in the book, this crazy, and there's some wonderful stories in here, and it's really honestly worth taking a look. Some that are, just rather ridiculous, including a trip to Spain that I took. And King Juan Carlos, it was one of those trips. And I'll never forget all these fancy
As a king,
people.
I
I was a kid, I was in high school.
quite a party.
I'm thinking I'm all that, again, young man in a hurry in his little suit, thinking he's, Pierce Brosnan from Remington Steele. Like actually, literally. And just discovered hair gel. That's a whole nother chapter in the book. Forgive me. And I'm telling you, I'm with Ann and Gordon's 4 kids on this trip, and relatively the same age, and the Getty boys. People are, oh, it's wonderful to meet all you. Which one are you? I'll never forget. Which one are you? With such pride. And I said, well, my name's Gavin Newsom. She goes, which one is that? I said, Newsom. And she literally immediately turns. Go away, young man. And it was such an imposter moment. Like you knew your status. You knew your standing. And so that was my relationship to that. I walked into those doors, but I walked back home into my mom's arms. And I'll never forget all those trips. Once a year, we would go on these amazing trips with my father and the family. But I'd always come back home. And when my mom opened the door, she was not on those trips. She would go, invariably, she'd go, oh, welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful time. Good night. And literally never talk about it again. And that was the reality. And so it shapes, it shapes a consciousness of wealth, but in different layers, in a different understanding. The proximity to it, the relationship to it, but never absorbing it. My father, when he passed away, he gave us a second mortgage and a lot of beautiful books in a small town in Dutch Flat, California, in Placer County. So even his relationship, it never created the abundance that so many people, I think, believe in terms of my life and the perception of remarkable privilege, plenty of privilege, plenty of doors that were open. I'm not naive about that. But again, a very different reality than those many believe.
Speaking of extreme wealth, I mean, you knew a lot of the big luminaries in tech when they were broke, right? I mean, you write about Steve Jobs showing you the first iPhone at a party with...
We were wow.
Sergey Brin was there. Yeah. I think you said Elon Musk gave you a ride into the set of current TV in the first Tesla Roadster, right?
First Tesla.
I know I've heard you say, and I agree, that like tech writ large, there hasn't been as big of a metamorphosis as people might think, given where some of the CEOs are. But it does seem like there was an inflection point, maybe around COVID, maybe around Trump's election or re-election, that radicalized, changed some of them, or made them speak out. Elon Musk, obviously, being the number one example. Do you have a theory for
not
what
only
happened?
a theory, I actually, interestingly, that's part of the book that we're not publishing. And I write about it in detail, particularly Elon's relationship to me and the state, and stories around how he got us ventilators, which he never did. And how that breakdown started occurring. I started seeing, there was libertarian tendencies, but we saw something that came out the other side very, very different. For a lot of people, not just some of these more well-known tech luminaries. And it's been hard to see. In every way, shape, or form. Because I write about those early days. Kara Swisher, she wrote an amazing book in this space. And Kara and I were talking about it the other day in San Francisco and comparing notes to the old days. And it was do no harm back then. There was a sense of idealism, and we were connecting the world. And San Francisco was in the center of that entire universe. I remember doing Uber Day and Yelp Day and Twitter Day, and it was like a big deal, and the CEOs would show up, and I got a t-shirt. And I was like the first guy on Twitter, and I was like, you could go back to my first tweet. I'm jogging in the marina. I didn't know, what does this even mean? I'm getting a coffee. Wow, this is amazing. I have 10 followers. And and it was when Larry and Sergey were talking about we need to do free Wi-Fi in San Francisco, and so it's just so radically different, and it feels so much darker because it is today. And that darkness came on an inaugural, when I saw all those guys up there, and it wasn't just those guys. I joke about that Patriot site and the knee pads. The good news is we have new ones in because they're the new Trump Signature Series knee pads because the last ones sold out, just like many of the tech CEOs, just like the lawyers, just like the universities, just like the law firms, just like so many members of the media have been selling out this country, our republic. And so, we got to call that out, and we got to call them out. And that's why.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, all right. We're going to continue the conversation up here. This is, okay. All right, we're going to continue the conversation. Let's please let the governor talk. We're going to have a conversation up here about the book. That's what we're here for. So, Governor, continue, please.
I appreciate it. So, look, I think it goes to the zeitgeist of this moment and the moment all of us are feeling, the anxiety, the stress, and I think so much without, getting into the last few years. I mean, I think, it's been the last 10 years since Trump came down the escalator. And just, this stacking of stress that's reflected in, I signed the first bill banning private prisons, including CoreCivic in California. So that was legislation I advanced, I signed with respect. And I don't know that there's many. I take a backseat to no one being a fierce opponent to what's happening on American streets. It happened here first in the state of California. We saw 4,000 of our National Guard troop here in Los Angeles, federalized. 700 active duty Marines were not sent overseas. They were sent to the second largest city in the United States of America. What did we say last June? We said it was a preview of things to come. You saw exactly that happen in DC. You saw it happen in Chicago. You saw it happen in Minnesota. But you also saw the steel in the spines of Minnesotans that stood up in the retreat of Trump and Trumpism, which should give us pause to reflect on some optimism that we can defeat these guys. He's in retreat. And so I appreciate the advocacy. I appreciate people standing up. All of us have that responsibility. All of us have the role to play. But we are on edge. Communities are on edge. When we launched that Prop 50 campaign in Little Tokyo, the Democracy Center, people said, "Did you see the masked men out front?" I'm like, come on, there aren't masked men. We literally went around the side. There were folks in masks. We didn't know who the hell they were. They weren't marked with any representation. And then this guy dressed up, honestly, like he came off a set in Burbank in 1930s garb, literally with a Himmler haircut, guy named Bovino, Gray Bovino. And we said at the time that was a preview of things to come. So I appreciate the relationship to this moment is shaped by so many moments we have and have had here in the state of California. But it's also marked with the moment of resolve and conviction. And so I'm here, in the relationship to my truth and my past, this is not a story about perfection. It's a story about perseverance. That perseverance of a mom who, as a young child was thrown against a fireplace by her father, who put a gun to her head. That same grandfather of mine, her father, that spent years as a prisoner of war after the march in Corregidor, and how he came back a different person, ultimately took his life. How my mom took her life in a moment of her own despair because of her own pain, because she was struggling for the second time with breast cancer, and she just couldn't take it. And at a time when it was illegal to do assisted suicide. And she found a doctor who had the courage to give up, he was risking his license. In the relationship to that moment, and those moments you never get again, and how precious this all is. And so I hope we're all standing, including those that are speaking. I appreciate them, that context. We're all standing in this moment, that we all have agency, and that we're not bystanders in the world. And I think that's my history. That's my father's fierce advocacy. He was an environmental warrior. I mean, our first pet, this is hardly relatable.
This is a weird pet, yeah.
This is not on your bingo card. Our first pet was an otter. Yeah.
What does the otter eat?
Your fingers and toes and
Weren't you little?
anything he
Biting you?
sees in the house.
This jumped out at me in the book. I literally wrote down, you had a fucking pet otter growing up, ?
And you eventually gave it away, right? Did you have to?
We had to give it away because he bit the mailman, and my mom.
That's fair.
This was the first act of resistance in my home. My mom said, it's either the otter or you, Dad, to my father. But I say that to make a point. By the way, his name was Potter the otter.
It's a good name.
Yeah, why not? But it marks my father, and just as a fierce, environmental warrior and environmental justice and, racial justice, economic justice. He was a Sarge Schreiber Democrat. He was a Bobby Kennedy Democrat. He was an activist judge on the California Court of Appeals. And he marks my sense of idealism and daring, but that grit, that hard work, and the energy of my mom. And it's a combination of all those things. And it's a combination that has allowed me to get through a recall. It's a combination that allows me to wake up every day and read another Truth Social and, try to sort of, mark a relationship to this moment, to do better, to do more, and recognize that we have to do better and more because people are suffering, people are struggling. And we all have to raise the bar of expectations and accountability and self-reflection. And so this is a book about self-reflection. It's a book about taking a deep breath, letting go, and just being yourself and putting it out there. And I hope people, you've seen with me, I'm willing to go out there on the limb. I'm putting a mirror up to Trump and Trumpism. If you check out my social media, go to that Patriot store. And, and I'm in the arena, man, and I'm not perfect. And I know you want more and better. I get it. And I'm not trying to be any more, goes to your question, someone I'm not. And I'm who I am. And you don't have to like the book. I can't control the third thing. I can only control what I can control. And it's what I learned in this process. And that's why it's been a really remarkable gift to be able to tell my story and to be able to dedicate it to those that will carry on this story. And that's my precious 4 kids, to Dutch, Brooklyn, and Hunter, and Montana, and to my extraordinary wife, who's also here with me tonight, as you know from the introduction, and to make sure I don't screw that up. Because at the end of the day, we could talk about our resume values. No one gives a damn about those. It's your eulogy. And it's that relationship to your truth. It's your relationship to others. And it's your relationship to the world we're trying to build. And how we can, be fierce advocates for each other.
Well, speaking of that world, I want to sort of talk about something in attention in politics that I think about a lot, that I think you have dealt with. Against the best wishes of your mother, you did go into politics. You become mayor of San Francisco, and when you were mayor, you write about this. You went against the law, the California Constitution, the Democratic Party, most Americans.
You don't have to start with the law, but
even most Californians, when you allowed the first same-sex marriage to take place in San Francisco.
No one was applauding back then, I assure you.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what.
Weren't.
And I think reading it, you get the idea of sort of the politics and sort of like the tidal wave of public opinion that you were up against then. And you said, and you wrote in the book, that the reason you did it is because simply it was the right thing to do, and which is refreshing. And you also called the sort of go it slow, I think you said admonition, the mother's milk of democratic politics. And there is a lot of go slow admonition out there. But, you know, we also live through elections. You've lived through many elections. After this last election in 2024, we've all been going through this process, what went wrong, and, you know, and you recently said, you know, Democrats need to spend less time on, you know, identity politics and pronouns and more on tabletop issues. And, but the question is, because you've been on both sides of this, like, how do you square those two potentially contradictory ideas?
Yeah, I don't know that they are. Look, my why is to stand up for ideals and strike out against injustice. And I don't come to that flippantly. I've really absorbed that. Stand up for ideals. Strike out against injustice. And if I'm on the fence on a bill or a fence on a personal decision or a professional, even business decision, that's where the default is. And that's reflected in marriage equality in 2004. Remember, in 2004, we were just finishing up the debate around domestic partnerships. We weren't even into separate is equal, which was civil unions back then. And that's where, by the way, a lot of my family was. You know, old Irish Catholic family, the West Side, if you get my drift, to San Francisco, the church, the Irish Catholic Church, where my dad was. And I describe in the book this scene where he kind of had an intervention with my Uncle Brennan, his brother, and this fierce warrior for justice, Joe Kachet, one of our country's great lawyers. And Kachet, they had an intervention the night before I was going to move forward with one marriage. And there's a whole nother story there. And they're like, why are you doing this? You just got elected. Like, things are good. You're relatively young. You were the youngest mayor in the 100 years. You know, you got plenty of time. You don't need to do this. No one asked you to do this. Folks don't want you to do this. We don't want you to do this. And I really got into it, and they started really challenging me, and I couldn't answer. And in a fit of frustration, that's when I said, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was exacerbated, and I was like, it's the right thing. And I'll never forget, Joe looked at my dad and my uncle, and he said, boys, it's the right thing to do. And that was the end of it. Next morning, I married Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin. They've been together 47 years. And, 4,035 other couples from 46 states and 6 countries got married in what we refer to in San Francisco, not as the summer of love, but the winter of love. But there wasn't a lot of love, to your point, I was getting from the Democratic Party. We had the convention later that year, and, I won't name names, but folks were like, you really should focus on homelessness in San Francisco. You don't have to go. They're like, you really don't have to. Certainly, you're not going to be speaking. See, you really don't have to show up. And the hard part was a lot of the folks that showed up for me on election night who all universally gave me the same advice. It's the advice we all get. Young man, just do what you think is right. Those same folks were out there saying, what the fuck do you think you're doing? And there were folks that ultimately blamed me, and this is the serious part of your question, and this is what I back to scrutinize, not sanitize, for the election outcome. Too much, too soon, too fast. I can wax on about letters from Birmingham jail, which I did, which I reread, or maybe read for the first time. They meant something very different. It's always the right time to do the right thing, King said. And so fast forward to the conversations we're all having today and what we need to do to get back into power. And so it's a legitimate question. So you have the tactics, the electoral question, and then you have the policy-making question. And I just think the Democratic Party needs to be a little, and forgive this word, ruthless about winning. We just have to be. And so that's the second part of your question. We're just trying to win arguments. Right after Donald Trump called Greg Abbott and said he was, quote unquote, entitled to 5 seats, because he knows he's going to get shellacked in the midterm elections. He knows he's going to lose. So he's trying to rig the election. That's one of 10 things he's doing. We could talk about the other 9, is doing mid-decade redistricting. I imagine he thought, and frankly, I may have even thought, our reaction would be maybe like to call you guys up, see if you can help maybe draft an op-ed that we can place in the New York Times. Wow. To try to win an argument, you know. Gosh, darn it, this is so wrong. And, you know, and we responded very differently. We said, look, we got to fight fire with fire. We're going to lose this country. We're going to lose our republic. And so I just think at the core, my humble belief, guys, is at the core of our party problem, it's my humble belief, is strength. We've got to be stronger in our convictions, our courage. We've got to start to dominate the narrative again. We've got to win not just the argument, but we've got to address the attention deficit that we have. There's an asymmetry. These guys have propaganda networks. It's Pravda, it's primetime lineup. I mean, my gosh, Laura Ingraham is in business with Trump Jr. That's happening in the United States of America. I mean, it's Pravda, you know, listening to Hannity and these guys, and Murdoch Inc. It's surround sound 24/7. They're flooding the zone. Donald Trump understands this. So we can no longer be conventional in our politics, is ultimately what I'm arguing for.
So the line that stuck out to Tommy was about the otter. For me, it was this line. You write this about becoming a father, quote, "I could count on one hand the times I actually changed a diaper." You have 4 children, sir.
This was the first child.
How did you pull that off?
You know, this was the edit my wife made to the book. I don't think, Jen, that it's that bad. But like I said, I was scrutinizing, not sanitizing. This young man in hurry was out and about. You know, I was mayor of San Francisco. I was showing up at events. And that was a pattern interrupt. You know, in psychology, we talk about scratching the record for those old enough to know what a record is. And, you know, a pattern interrupt where Jen's like, get your shit together. And there were a number of those pattern interrupts that I write honestly about. Look, one of the things that I imagine, you know, Jen's here, gotta be careful, that she was wondering when she married me, like, what kind of husband are you gonna be? And then shortly after, truly, what kind of dad are you gonna be? Are you gonna be your dad? You know, she loved my father. My father was present in my life later on. But she was also deeply aware he wasn't when we were growing up. And that stress test came home in this beautiful bundle of joy, Montana. Our firstborn, Montana Tessa, who wasn't there, my mom, Ebell Newsom. And I didn't know until that moment. And you guys have had this, right? You don't know. You can intellectualize it all day. But I had something that I'm not sure my dad ever had. And boy, Dad, you missed it. I had this thing that went from here and it just burst in here. And it was like this baritone, this deep, like, oh, whoa. This light, this sort of like, oh my God. To truly understand love at a different level. That said, I didn't necessarily love changing diapers. And Jen, who's a fierce advocate and has written and done all kinds of documentaries, one called Fair Play, which is about partnership in the household. She kind of reminded me, you got to get your shit together. You got to step up your game. And so that was marked for my first daughter's diapers. I made up for it, sir, John, with all the other kids, and continue to work harder to make up for equal time and parenting, though equal may be illusory. I'm still working on that.
One other thing that jumped out at me in the book is you talk about, you know, election night, you get elected governor, you wake up the next day, you walk out of the hotel room, and there's 2, you know, California State Patrolmen who then become your kind of ubiquitous part of your life, your security detail.
Yeah.
And you're then followed by staff everywhere you go. And you you lose your anonymity, you lose your freedom. I think you say freedom is the price you paid for the privilege of the job. Yeah. I was wondering how that impacted you, and if you thought about how there are other jobs where that problem may be exacerbated. Even the process of running is exponentially worse. And if that bothers you, if that worries you, is that something you think about? You can't go for a walk, you can't drive yourself in a car, you can't go to fucking drive-through.
Look, and everyone's rolling like, whatever, yeah, oh, it's so tough for you. But that is, there is a thing, so in the book I describe, just running for office and being able to run around on the streets and be able to go to coffee clutches and stores and, have some anonymity here a little bit, people angry, pissed off, yelling here, and, you should do this, that, fine. And then there's an election. And I literally went to bed. And then truly, I woke up the next morning and didn't get a lot of sleep. And sort of blurry-eyed walked out, and there's like these two strangers right outside the door. I'm like, oh, hey, sorry, what's, excuse me. And I walked down, and they're like, they started walking with me. I'm like, who the hell are you guys? And it literally was that moment that I have not had one without some semblance of that. Guys in the car, you're trying to make a phone call. Hey, honey, how are you? I'm fine. You want to talk about it? I'm fine. What's wrong? Nothing. They're sitting right there. And sort of this relationship to anonymity where, there was a year and a half where literally I wouldn't get on an airplane, not for me, but for everyone else on the plane. Because I'm like, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know. People, this, that, the whole thing. Because I get it. Like back to the stacking of stress, back to the intention that we're all feeling. And so it allowed me to drive back and forth to LA more often and spend more time in the Central Valley than any governor in history, which was also important. But yeah, it is, you lose that, you lose the serendipity. Yeah. And I remember as mayor, I lost a little of it, but not a lot. So every week, a true story, and I wrote about it a little bit, every Friday, I would walk to work and I'd walk through the Tenderloin of San Francisco. And I didn't need the focus group, I didn't need to see where the polls were. You got the pulse of how people felt in that relationship to people's struggles and aspirations and desperation, especially in that part of San Francisco. And I miss that, and I think our politics misses that. You want your elected officials. It's management by walking around. You want to walk through Skid Row, but not with an entourage. You don't want to be that guy. You want to be able to absorb and feel and understand how you're really doing. And I think you're right with the president. I mean, that's something I can't even imagine, and you guys were up close to that, how that disconnection to your truth and that relationship to that truth and how you absorb it and how you feel it differently than intellectualizing and poll testing it, how I think it does shape our politics, and how do you overcompensate for that?
Especially now with the violence, right? Especially with Trump, people shooting at Trump, the Charlie Kirk assassination. I mean, the distance between politicians and the people who they're serving or trying to get votes from is only getting greater and greater, and it's
don't even. This is like an actual real thing, and this is where I think about any future. I think about in relationship to my kids. When I talk about that recall, we had to homeschool my oldest daughter, and I will never forget. I helped her with her speech that she gave in our living room for 8th grade graduation. And I was so proud of her because she looked up the whole time. And I said, look above someone's head because they'll see you thinking. And she was staring at me with a big smile as she gave this beautiful speech, but she gave it just to Jen and the kids and her brothers and sisters because the attacks at the school. I hate your daddy, I hate this and that. And we had, this again, we all had this, protesters for almost a year and a half. And now, to your point about what's happened, this is another level of stuff. And trust me, you don't know an infinitesimal amount of the stuff that comes in. And that's why the temperature definitely, we have to take that temperature down. And I do worry about it. We talk about, when you send troops to American city, not overseas, this sort of the lack of civility and this concern that we all have, are we crossing those red lines? Are we at war with one another? And forgive me, because I know and forgot the long-windedness, but we've had this conversation when I went on your podcast, because you were asking me about mine. And thank you, the one of you.
Yeah, listener.
No, please applaud.
I've
That's
got
podcast.
one listener.
The man has a podcast.
That's the sound of a
That's
download.
amazing. But people felt I crossed the line because I was reaching across the aisle. Because I was making the case Bill Clinton made for years and years. Divorce is not an option. We're just, it's not. Just because I don't want you to exist doesn't mean you're not going to persist. And we just have to define the terms of the future. And so I started reaching out to people I vehemently disagreed with. And a lot of folks were angry, saying, how are you platforming these people? Why are you talking to that son of a bitch? But it's honestly, it was in my relationship to this reality, man. We got to take the temperature down. We can punch Trump back, we can have the line, but at the same time, man, we all want to be loved. We all need to be loved. We all want to be protected, connected, respected, and we've just got to move. I appreciate the resistance frame, but I think all of us back to, we want to talk about renewal. We want to talk about the rebirth of our civic, spirit and civic pride and our civic duty, and we're all waiting for that moment. That moment's going to come. I don't think it's here yet. We're in this struggle. In so many ways, the obstacle is the way. Trump will define that. But all of us look forward to when we can turn the page on this moment and we can restore some civility and grace.
So the epilogue of the book, you write a lot about your relationship with Trump, your interactions with Trump. We could talk about it forever. We will not do that.
I want to talk about my tour with Trump in the bedroom.
Well, that's what.
First one.
So the thing that Tommy and I really want to know is, tell us more about the reaction on Jared Kushner's face when Donald Trump said in front of him and you that he wished Ivanka had married Tom Brady instead.
Yeah.
Seems kind of mean.
Was he crying?
It's a weird thing to say to your son.
I was crying for Jared. I thought, how could someone, it was so dehumanizing in front of his own son-in-law, saying it wasn't his first choice. And if Trump can do that to his son-in-law in Marine One, in front of strangers, that sums him up, man. That sums him up. And it's a fun little story where Trump talks about how Ivanka didn't call Tom Brady back. And she's like, what the hell, why are you calling Tom Brady back? It's Tom Brady. And she goes, well, Dad, I'm in love. And Trump is telling the story, and he goes, well, who are you in love with? Well, with Jared. And he goes, you mean the guy whose father was in jail? He says it in front of Jared right there. Said, can you believe it? He hits me on the leg, said, can you believe Tom Brady? She didn't do Tom Brady. I'm like, there's Jared's right there. Damn.
That is so weird.
Damn.
So weird.
So weird.
It really the story brought me joy, though. It's petty, but.
Yeah, no, Jared sucks, but no one deserves that. Also, Tom Brady's everybody's first choice, if we're being honest.
Look at this guy.
Take a number, Ivanka. What are you talking about?
Governor, you've been so generous with your time. Everyone, the book is Young Man in a Hurry. It is honestly, it's a really good book.
I appreciate it.
It's a really good book.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for reading the book. Thank you to John and Tommy. Thank you guys all for being here. I appreciate you. Thank you guys very, very much.